Hi, I'm Jeannie Gang with Studio Gang Architects, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guild. On today's show, we meet someone who wants to do preservation in a war zone. Dmytro Soloviov documents Ukraine's modernist architecture. Then we'll talk to Ben Wever, who cares for one of America's modernist treasures, the Miller House in Columbus, Indiana. Hallie Swenson uncovers the stories of San Diego Modernism, and architect Robert Stone brings new desert modernism to life. And now, your host, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Thanks, Tom. Architects complain constantly that the public doesn't know what they do or appreciate what they do. They complain that the media only wants to follow the starchitects. They complain that clients have no imagination and rarely want to think outside of the box. So let's start with the public. The average person has no clue what architects really do other than draw buildings. They don't know about all the building codes, the structural calculations, the zoning conditions, managing design and construction, the sun studies, and the endless list of tasks. After all, most of us have a doctor, and a few of us will have a lawyer, but only a tiny percentage will ever hire an architect for a house. Those that do likely have no training in design, no experience with architects, and a long list of must-have features cultivated over too many years of watching HGTV. The media tends to focus on larger, spectacular buildings, and those are typically done by very well-known firms. So what are our hundreds of thousands of intrepid, talented architects, the small firms of America, supposed to do? Well, let's look at what architects have done in the past. Every 10 years, the profession goes through a major existential crisis. Many pearls are clutched, many articles are published, and many meetings of architects convened. These meetings rarely include the public or the media to actually talk with them. Oh no, that would be too uncomfortable for the architects. The profession is also obsessed with elevating things, a pretentiousness that only separates architects more from the public. So to narrow this gap, every 10 years, the architects come to the same basic conclusion. Let's elevate the public's understanding of architecture through a series of lectures and articles. And after about 3 months of said lectures and articles, few of which are attended by the public or read by the public, these depressed architects give up and wait until the next sad existential cycle. If you want the public to understand what you do, to appreciate design, to value the profession, the answer is not to bring the public to you. The public wants to be engaged in a way that's fun, accessible, and enjoyable. They want stories they can relate to. They want personality. They don't want to be elevated, that's for sure, because a little knowledge goes a long way. If you want people to care about what you do, make it interesting. Make it human. Drop the jargon. If you want people to love architecture, be lovable. Stop believing that enjoyment and architecture are mutually exclusive. The single biggest obstacle between the public and the profession isn't the public's ignorance. It's the profession's own reluctance to engage on terms that aren't its own. It's time architects demanded less from the public and met them where they are. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by the Brent R. Harris Charitable Trust, restorer of Richard Neutra's Kaufman Desert House in Palm Springs and 6 other houses in California. By the Ife Jones Conservancy, preserving the legacy of modernist architecture in Northwest Arkansas, ifejonesconservancy.org. And by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs.
Photographer and tour guide Dmytro Soloviov has spent years documenting Ukraine's overlooked modernist heritage. Since 2018, he has traveled across this war-torn country, capturing more than 120 buildings, their mosaics, stained glass, and sculptural details, often under difficult conditions we just can't imagine. Once symbols of post-war optimism and innovation, many modernist structures now face neglect, redevelopment, or destruction. Through his Ukrainian Modernism project, which has grown from an Instagram page into a comprehensive book, Soloviov is preserving his country's vital architectural legacy. Here's George with Dmytro.
Dmytro, before we start talking about architecture in Ukraine, you are the first guest that I've had on the show that we've talked to in a war zone. So what is it like in your country right now?
Frankly, George, not great. I'm in Kiev, the capital right now. Been living here for 8 years. And it's pretty bad for us civilians because of the repeated airstrikes on the city and airstrikes that target energy infrastructure. So this is going to be a long, cold and dark winter for us because the Russians damaged badly our energy infrastructure. And now in Kiev, we're having like 6 to 8 hours of electricity per day. And that is really disruptive. But it's not as bad as on the front lines, of course, where our soldiers are dying. But for us civilians here is also pretty, I would say, exhaustive, especially if you count that we're nearing the 4th year's mark of this full-scale invasion. So, it's honestly, it's tough.
Yeah, I just can't imagine. I mean, certainly people in America have never had that experience unless they've been in certain countries overseas.
Yeah.
How is this affecting the buildings there? Are there a lot of modernist buildings being destroyed during this war?
Across the country, yes. Especially in the cities where the hostilities took place, like Kherson or cities in Donetsk Oblast. While on the more peaceful regions, just occasional airstrikes damaged several buildings, like in Kharkiv, a bit famous building called Держпром. It's like the old Ministry of Industry in Kharkiv. It's constructivist building from the 20s. So it's the very early wave of modernism in Ukraine. And it's been on tentative UNESCO list. And it's been badly damaged by airstrikes. But unfortunately, except the war-related damage, there is also a threat to modernist buildings and to heritage in general, not only modernist.
All the buildings?
Yeah, from developers and sometimes even from the government itself.
In America, we're told two things that seem to be the opposite. We're told that modernism in Ukraine is all Soviet-based and to try to advance the Soviet agenda. And then we're told that it was anti-Soviet and it was supposed to be in rebellion to the Soviets. I mean, which is it?
Well, it's really interesting to hear from the other side how we are being seen in our architecture. And I think the answer, as always, is somewhere in the middle, because it was not all white and black like that.
Yeah.
It was simply a regime in which people were born, and they didn't know, some of them, they didn't know anything else, and just get on with their lives. And many of the architects, they weren't political or ideological. They were just doing their job, designing buildings that supposed to improve the quality of life for the people, the quality of industry, whatever, to make the cities more comfortable. So, of course, Soviet modernism has differences from modernism in the world at large because, well, we had a very unfortunate break in the modernism cycle because of the Stalin, who usurped power in the late 20s, early 30s, and installed, like all the right-wing dictators, installed his own style, neoclassical, which was later became known as Stalinist Empire. The same what Hitler did and Mussolini and Franco in Spain, and the same what Trump is doing right now, making those, laws to build all new federal buildings beautiful and neoclassical and building the ballroom. Yeah, so roughly from 1935 to 1955, we didn't have modernism at all because of Stalin. And when Khrushchev took over and there was a period of thaw, architecture slowly went back to its organic, where it was in the world, still modernist. And architects basically had to learn anew. There was a lot of exchange. Architects were going on trips to the USA, to Europe. I've read all the archive of the Soviet Ukrainian magazine Architecture and Construction from 1956 to 1991. And almost in every issue, there was a couple of pages about foreign architecture. So they were in dialogue with the world. So there is some differences, of course, and
Right.
but it wasn't controlled, like it wasn't imposed like Stalinist architecture. Art was more or less controlled because of the Stalinists in the Union of Artists who controlled how art's supposed to look like, and they preferred not modernism, not abstract, but socialist realism. And with architecture, there was no control. Architects express themselves as they should. Sometimes the councils, architecture councils, interfered, but it wasn't to promote Soviet agenda, because I have no idea how architecture could promote the Soviet agenda in the 60s and in the 70s.
Dmytro, it sounds like there was modernism up until 1935, but then the Stalinist period was very discouraging against that. And then post-1955, architecture kind of came back in more on its own, not so much with a government agenda, but just where there was much more creativity and permission to build these kinds of buildings. And of course, at that point, the whole country, like many countries across the world, was promoting modernism as this kind of optimism, that the future was going to be great and it was going to be better, and these buildings represented that, right?
Yes, exactly. And the famous flying saucer building in Kiev.
Oh, yes. Tell me about that one. I'm really fascinated with that building. How did that get started?
Yeah, I think it's a perfect example of not only of the optimism, but also of the space race and dreams of space that were very popular, especially across the Soviet Union, with famous Soviet astronauts and Soviet space achievements. So people were, how to say, hyped about this. And architecture reflected, as architecture reflects everything always that's going on in society. And that building, it was simply an audience hall for the Institute of Scientific Information of the State Planning Committee. So it was just an administrative building. But the architect had this amazing idea to shape the audience hall, the concert hall, like the flying saucer. And it became a landmark and has made its way into books like Frederick Chopin's Cosmic Communist Construction Photograph, the first book on Soviet modernism that was published in 2011. And it became one of the icons of Ukrainian modernism.
And there's some other well-known structures too, the Kiev Crematorium, the Salut Hotel, the Uzhhorod Airport, right?
Yeah.
Let's see if I can get this one. Novo-Arkhangelsk Police Station?
Oh, that's a really small, the police station there, yeah. Salut Hotel is another example, as well as crematorium. Crematorium was designed by artists who were rebellious, indeed, and had some conflicts with the architect, and there's a lot of interesting stories, if only we had more time. But all the other buildings, they were simply, designed by these huge architecture design institutes, which employed thousands of people sometimes. There were no independent architecture bureaus like in the US or in Europe. So it was these large state enterprises. And within them, smaller teams worked on separate projects as they were commissioned. Creativity flourished. I think it would be hard to argue against after scrolling through my book, maybe.
Yeah. Who were some of the well-known architects of the modernist era in your country?
Well, I think Avram Miletsky is the most prolific one. He designed the first post-Stalin modernist buildings, the central bus station in Kiev, the Palace of Young Pioneers in Kiev, currently called the Palace of Youth and Children. Later, he designed the famous Salute Hotel. So Avram Miletsky indeed is an embodiment of Soviet Ukrainian modernism at its best. And he was also a co-author of the crematorium.
Okay. You got to travel around the country quite a bit as a photographer in preparing for your book, but how do you do that when the country's at war?
Yeah, that's a good question because it wasn't exactly a piece of cake. First of all, the people are very suspicious of anyone with a camera. So I had quite a few accidents with locals trying to, stop me, yelling at me, saying, "You're a spy." Even though I was walking in the open with a big camera, definitely not looking like a spy.
Yeah.
And actually two times, I got apprehended by the police and I was delivered to the police precinct twice in Lutsk and in Kharkiv to check if I'm indeed not a spy.
So are they pretty easygoing about it? I mean, your cover story checks out pretty quickly, I would imagine. Did they believe you right away?
Well, the patrol police did not.
Okay.
You don't have any right to apprehend me because I didn't break any laws. There is no law against taking pictures. And they're like, "Oh, yeah, but there is a war going on, don't you know?" I'm like, "Yeah, but..." So they apprehended me anyway. And then the investigators, they were pretty chill about it and actually understood. And even in the end, they suggested me a couple of things to see in the city.
Oh, really? Oh, that's great.
Yeah, but it took a lot of time and it took a lot of stress. So a totally new dimension to the job of architecture photographer when your country is at war.
Oh, absolutely. I just can't imagine. How has reception been to your new book, Ukrainian Modernism?
From what I've seen, it's been pretty positive. On Amazon, the reviews are overwhelmingly positive. On Instagram, everyone is really happy and excited in the book. I saw the book traveling all across the world, in Korea, all across Europe, in Latin America, and Ukrainians who are abroad buying the book in Canada and saying how happy they are to have a piece of home with them through this book. Or foreigners who are learning about Ukraine thanks to the book from a quite unexpected, maybe, dimension through the media coverage that's been ongoing since the war started. It's mostly like churches and trenches. And I'm glad that this book uncovers that there is so much more to Ukraine than that.
I guess it's impossible for you to go to places like Crimea at this point, right?
No, absolutely not possible.
Because those are sites of some really interesting sanatoriums that are modernist.
Oh, they are amazing. They are one of the best examples of modernism, the most extravagant, because while designing sanatoriums, the architects had almost complete carte blanche in designing, and because it was resort architecture, so they employed all the crazy ideas that might have been not approved as an administrative building, because administrative buildings in Soviet Union, even modern ones, were very somber, very restrained, almost like boxes or squares. Unlike, for example, Boston City Hall, the brilliant brutalist marvel, because, I don't know, Soviet government probably thought that party workers should just do their job and not get distracted by architecture. While theaters, sanatoriums, cinemas had amazing designs. And it's really heartbreaking that the beautiful land of Crimea is lost to us for 11 years now, since Russia annexed it in 2014.
And I understand they destroyed one of the really nice sanatoriums there, the Dawn of Ukraine Sanatorium.
Oh, yeah, that was an excellent one, and they destroyed it too for new development, yes.
Okay. And it wasn't that old. It opened in 1986.
Yeah. No, it was not an issue of age or anything else, just a question of money. To make more money, they demolished it.
Besides being under invasion, architecture, as you alluded to earlier, is being taken over by a lot of developers in Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's a bonanza opportunity for people that want to build, even though it's a war zone. How does that work?
Yeah, it's a good question. We hope that the level of corruption would shrink. Yeah, it was wishful thinking, but developers didn't stop. They, when they understood that it's a long run, they rebounded and with excessive force started buying new and new pieces of land. For example, that same flying saucer we've been talking about,
Yeah.
it's now fully enclosed by the huge looming shopping mall. So in its original state, it's basically ceased to exist. The flying saucer, it's been consumed by a mall.
There's a mall next to it, I know, but what is the use of the flying saucer building now? What is it being used for?
It's vacant, it's empty.
It's empty.
Yes, and there is no knowing what will happen next to it because developer promised they wouldn't like reach 10 meters towards it, but they are like now 1 meter away from it with their mall. And this happens all across country. Modernist and also historical buildings being developed against public will to make space for commercial development. And sometimes even government does that. A few weeks before the war, Zelensky's government destroyed one of the modernist pavilions of the National Exhibition Center in Kiev to build a presidential university there. An ambition not unlike Trump's, I'd say. That was very egregious, and I even organized a protest there against this. The last protest that we could make because 2 weeks later the war started, and now it's illegal to make protests. So unfortunately, neither the government nor the developers, they do not respect or care about heritage at all, including modern. And modernism even is way less understood and appreciated, unlike historical architecture.
So all of the mechanisms that existed previously in the Ukrainian government are pretty much gone now.
I'm not sure if they ever existed because it's been pretty rough ride for the last 30 years. For example, our beautiful mosaics and monumental art, the stained glass, the bas-reliefs that were created during Soviet times, the likes of which are not found in Europe or the US. This public art, it's not existent legally. It doesn't exist. The government doesn't own it. Cities don't own it. And people destroy it in mass for various reasons. So there is no such thing as protection of 20th century heritage, and only activists are trying to somehow to remedy the situation, but we can only do so much.
Right. The book is Ukrainian Modernism. Thank you so much for talking with me, Dmytro, and I wish the best for you and your country.
It was an absolute pleasure, George. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for doing this.
That was George's conversation with Ukraine's Dmytro Soloviov. In Columbus, Indiana, the 1957 Miller House and Garden still stands as a gold standard of modernist design, architecture, interiors, and landscape intricately entwined. Designed by Eero Saarinen and commissioned by Irwin and Xenia Miller, the home helped establish Columbus as a center for modern architecture, and it remains one of the most intact examples of its kind. Few people know the property better than Ben Wever. He began working there in 1999 as a groundskeeper, and he has spent decades caring for the site. Since 2010, he has managed the house and garden through its ownership transition to the Indianapolis Museum of Art, aka Newfields. Here's George's conversation with Ben Wever.
Ben, you've been associated with this house, the Miller House, since you were 16. What year was that?
That was 1996.
And how did you come into getting involved with this icon of modernist architecture and the Miller family?
Well, actually, they had a summer job that was offered, and I had always really been fond of all the modern architecture in Columbus and wanted to take that opportunity to start working here. So I came working here in 96 as a groundskeeper.
And how did you get promoted up through the system over the years?
Well, from groundskeeper, I actually became Mr. Miller's personal assistant. when he needed some extra help for about 4 years until he passed, and then was still caring for the building when the Indianapolis Museum of Art took possession. So I kind of came with the house.
Okay. That must have been great for everybody to have you be so familiar with it.
I think so, yes. Mm-hmm.
What is the significance of the Miller House? Why is it special? Why should people come visit it?
Well, it's one of the premier modernist houses in the whole world. There's only a few houses designed by Eero Saarinen. Many houses that people associate Eero Saarinen's work with actually were done with his father, Elio. So this is pretty special, being one of just a few that were just designed by Saarinen himself, Eero Saarinen himself. It's a beautiful building that's located on almost 14 acres of Dan Kiley's master landscape. The house, although is modern in design, uses a lot of opulent materials and is really unlike any other modern home that is around.
So the backstory of this is, of course, that the Millers were responsible for really kicking off the whole modern architecture wave in Columbus. How did they do that?
Well, they did that through a program through Cummins Engine Company, which Mr. Miller was running at the time. Mr. Miller saw there was a need for a lot of buildings after World War II, didn't want to have mediocre design. So if any public or nonprofit was building, Cummins would pay the architecture fees if they would choose from a small list of architects that the board had put together.
And did they take them up on that?
Yes, many people did, starting out with a school by Harry Weitz in 1957, which then went on to many other schools. Of course, Irwin Union Banks were owned by the Millers, so those were designed by significant architects. And it really caught on in the community to the point where many people would have their own church or other buildings designed by a modern architect.
Who were some of the architects that got hired to come into this small town?
Well, it's a pretty long list. It started out with Harry Weitz, and he did several buildings. Elliot Noyes, Cesar Pelli, Johan Johansson. There's quite a large list. Elio Saarinen, of course, was the first modern building in Columbus, then followed up by a few by Eero Saarinen. Just a pretty large group of names that were really up-and-coming stars at the time.
And these are names that still resonate with people today.
Yes.
I know that one element of the Miller House, which you have been with for so long now, that has gotten a lot of attention, is its sunken living room.
That's right.
So was that the first notable house to have that, or did it come along after sunken living rooms were a thing?
I think a lot of people will refer to it as one of the first, but through my studies, in the past, we threw scoff using them, I think, even in the late 30s. So I don't think it's one of the first. I just think it's one of the most notable and recognizable.
Most well known.
Yeah.
And for people that have never experienced one of these, you're walking down a step or two into usually a large square space surrounded by sofas. And the idea is this would promote more luxurious, intimate, intellectual, some adjective conversation, right?
Yes, that is right.
And drinking, I assume, was always a part of this as well.
Well, it could be part of that as well. And I guess that's one of the dangers of the conversation pit, navigating up and down stairs after a few drinks.
Yeah. I know that during the 60s, the conversation pit was always featured in a lot of TV shows as being the avant-garde living room to have.
You see it quite often. And I think that, even with the resurgence of modernism, we see a lot of that type of design, especially like with shows like Mad Men that came on and became very popular.
Besides the sunken living room, one of the things about this property is the incredible landscape design by Dan Kiley. You've got just an unbelievable parade of immaculate grounds. Tell me about those.
The garden design is, one of the most important pieces of this total design that I like to talk about at the Miller House. And I think that it really makes all of the spaces in the house even more special because every view as you go through the house, has its own personal view of Kylie's garden. And then if we pan out and we start looking at the floor plan and then going into the garden really just continues what that floor plan is doing and spirals out to all these special places, oftentimes what Kylie would call green rooms.
Okay. What are examples of these special places?
Well, one would be the pool. The pool has arborvitae that enclose the whole pool yard area. So then you are below the surface in the pool and all you see is all the greenery around you. So you feel like you're just in this whole world of this little individual garden space.
And I missed Latin class. So what is arborvitae exactly?
It's a large shrub. These were planted, actually, believe it or not, at around 4 feet. But now many of the arborvitae shrubs that are around the perimeter of the house are actually around 12 feet tall.
That's pretty incredible.
Yes.
Now, the house got a grant from the Getty Foundation a number of years ago for a conservation management plan. So what does a house have to think about for the future, particularly when you've got 4,000 people running through it each year?
Yes, that's a good question. Obviously, there is wear and tear, as you mentioned, with the guests coming through the house. But the house was built in 1957, so this conservation management plan that we have from Penn Praxis really is kind of a guideline that can help you through any kind of issue that you may have as far as exterior stone, the roof, the garden space. It really is a good way to take a look at what experts say is the best thing to do for each of these situations.
What is the biggest problem with having a house like the Miller house? Is it water and the roof? Is it the windows? What do you have to look at the closest in maintaining it?
Well, you got it. It's the roof. Having a flat roof in the Midwest is often troublesome. The way the skylights divide the roof sections, though, actually make 25 separate roof sections on the Miller house. So we have 25 different membranes that we have to keep an eye on, which all have individual drains that are hidden between the walls. So it's really something that we have to keep a really close eye on.
And do you have any issues of snowpack on a roof like this?
Well, right now, funny you should say that. We just received a pretty decent sized snow here. But the house is actually supported by 16 cruciform beams that hold the weight. These steel beams hold the weight of the whole house. So the snow is not really an issue on that other than when it needs to drain.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
Yes.
Now, when people come and want to visit, how do they get tickets to the Miller house?
We have a Columbus Area Visitors Center that provides tours of all of the architecturally significant sites. And since that was already in place, we work with them. So all you have to do is either go to the Columbus Area Visitors Center website, or you could also go to the Newfield website and it will direct you back and you can purchase tickets there.
And what are some of the other buildings that people can get inside in Columbus?
Columbus is very friendly to the tourists, so almost every significant building is available. We have Eliel Saarinen's First Christian Church, the first modernist building in town that is able to be viewed. We also have the North Christian Church, which is now called the Lex because it's the Library Experience building, but it's a church that Eero Saarinen designed that you have access to. And then the Columbus Area Visitor Center gives tours of about every other building in town, barring schools.
Okay. Did private citizens get in on this deal of famous architect, or did they have to do that themselves?
They actually did that themselves, which I think is very interesting because they chose to put the money up. They chose to use these architects at their own cost.
So there are lots of modernist private houses around Columbus as well as the public ones.
That's true. Yes. There are about 3 Harry Weiss houses, and then many local architects or architects from the state were also getting into that type of architecture at the time. So we have several low pitch, small slant roof and flat roof residences in Columbus as well.
Well, I can tell you folks from going to Columbus myself, and we're planning a trip for the future, that it is an absolute bucket list item. You will just be amazed how much great modernist architecture in this town, including the Miller House. Thanks so much for talking with me, Ben.
Thank you.
George was speaking with Ben Wever. Hallie Swenson graduated from Point Loma Nazarene University.
Go Sea Lions.
And earned a degree in architecture from Notre Dame.
Go Fighting Irish.
She's worked with Ruland Design Group, Island Architects, Will and Foch Architects, and Stanhope Gate Architecture. But she's here today to talk about the distinct modernism of San Diego. In fact, that is the title of an upcoming book she wrote with Mark Hargraves. It was edited by past podcast guest Keith York and came out late last year. In one respect, she's the fastest modernist author we know, pulling down the 800 meters in 2 minutes 15 seconds, the 1,600 meters in 5 minutes 13, and the 5,000 meters in a mere 1856. Woo, there she goes. Welcome, Hallie.
Hi, how's it going? I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Hallie, I can drive the 5,000 meters in 1756. Does that count?
Yeah, that counts. I can't do that today. So that was a, one and done.
Don't even shift a gear, George.
Yeah, I know. Just vroom. So San Diego is not a place most modernists think of, but it's actually very important, particularly going all the way back to an architect named Irving Gill, who was doing modernist architecture like way before the European guys started getting popular about it. So let's talk about Irving Gill first. What was he all about?
Yeah, so Irving Gill, he has an amazing kind of history. He actually started at the offices of Adler and Sullivan in Chicago. So he was kind of part of this very innovative time really early on. And he came out to San Diego for health reasons, we think, and he just is a unique character. He had these grand ideas of bringing these innovative thought processes and design from Chicago and creating this new school of thought in San Diego. He's different because he really wanted to integrate the architecture into the climate. So a lot of kind of the early modernists in Vienna and Germany and the international style, they wanted a break from tradition. So, they didn't look at anything that came before. They just wanted this new architecture. But Irving Gill actually did a lot of research and studying, and he traveled around like the Mediterranean and down through Mexico, and he really analyzed what San Diego kind of meant and what's important to the climate, and built a new architecture that had those really innovative ideals, but was also rooted in the place, which is really unique.
Now, he was doing modernist houses, as far as I can tell, like, 1915, 1917?
No, even earlier. So his first modernist house is 1907.
Wow.
And that's the Allen House in Bonita. So that's featured in the book, and it's incredible. You would have no idea that it was built that early.
Did they even call it modernist back then?
No, they didn't really have a term for it. It was like Mediterranean, geometric. So yeah, they didn't have a name for it for a long time. And it's really cool because Adolf Loos in Vienna was really the first modernist, and he's credited with his first, very avant-garde house, and he didn't build that until 1910. So Irving Gill was
ahead of
3 years
Loos,
prior,
yes.
And that's just the completion date of the project too, not the actual it takes a while to design and build houses. So Irving Gill was around the same time as Loos, but still he has that finished project that's earlier. So it's really exciting.
Now, at Notre Dame, you studied mostly classical and vernacular traditions. How did you end up in modernism?
Notre Dame is so amazing. So throughout our studies, we really just analyze the construction and the history and the craftsmen of all these different places. So in all of our study, we just kind of started with ancient Rome, and you just learn how these pieces all came together in architecture. So I lived in San Diego, so I went to school there at Point Loma, and then I worked there. And you just get to know the area. And it's just that thinking that Notre Dame kind of taught us to like break everything into pieces and how they're put together. And I just started doing that in San Diego as well. And with my co-author, Mark, he's really into the history and the people. He had previously written a book as well. So between the two of us, we really were just like, there's no real kind of analytical information on these amazing properties in San Diego. And so we just used that thinking of like breaking it down, putting it back together, and analyzed, all these amazing buildings.
Did you two play different roles? I mean, how'd you split up the work, you and Mark?
It was beautiful. It was great. So I had like kind of the more analytical approach and like architectural analysis. And then Mark took over the history and the timelines of the architects and how they met each other and how they were related to the society. So we really had like pretty clear roles that we each had. Mark did a lot of the archive work to find the amazing old photographs, and then I did newer drawings. So I did some kind of analytical drawings in the book as well. So we really worked well together.
Now, moving ahead many decades, we have to talk about Ken Kellogg.
Yes.
Who was an astonishing modernist architect.
Yes, he was. He was incredible, very unique architect in every single way. His personality, his style. I think at like a root level, Irving Gill, through his family tree that we talk about, really just set the stage of creativity and innovation for everybody. So I think Ken Kellogg just had this amazing mind, but he was in an environment that encouraged those kind of breaks from the structural restraints. And he just was in this environment that allowed him to use his full creativity. So he's very, very important and very unique to San Diego. It's kind of like a culmination of all these architects throughout the mid-century.
You can see all of Irving Gill's houses at usmodernist.org/Gill and all of Ken Kellogg's houses as we talk at usmodernist.org/Kellogg. Now, Ken Kellogg, in addition to do these amazing houses around California, he also was responsible for the Chart House and other restaurants, which were really quite incredible. I've been to one in Jacksonville, Florida. Are there any still standing in San Diego?
There's one left. I can't remember the street or anything, but you can still visit it. And there's a few of his buildings that you can still see. We talk about the Babcock House in San Diego, and you can still walk by that on the Mission Bay Boardwalk. So he has a bunch of amazing work.
And he just passed away, what, in 2024?
Yeah, 2024.
Who are some of the other notable architects in San Diego people would be interested?
We talk a lot about Lillian Rice. She is one of the two female architects that we talk about. She kind of gets overlooked because she has such this like amazing consistency in her work, but she had an incredible career. She has 14 houses on the historic designation list, and she was the sole architect of Rancho Santa Fe in San Diego. So she has a Mediterranean style, but she's learned from Irving Gill and Richard Requa, who is another very important figure of linking Irving Gill to these like more 1950s, 60s, more avant-garde architects. We also talk about Lloyd Rocco and Frederick Liebhardt. All of these architects just have such a distinct style that you can't see anywhere else in the world. And part of that is due to the climate of San Diego. There's no really restraints on the climate. There's no snow. There's not really rain. You don't have to worry about a lot of other things that determines architectural style. So there was a lot of like indoor-outdoor living, big glass windows. So all of them just took the climate and was able to be really creative with it in a lot of different ways.
The book is The Distinctive Modernism of San Diego. Hallie, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We were talking with Hallie Swenson. Our next guest was born and raised in Palm Springs. He's architect Robert Stone, and he first gained attention with his Joshua Tree homes, Aceto Dorado, and Rosa Muerta, which have appeared in publications ranging from Vogue Italia to Elle Decor. His latest project, Dreamer Lil Dreamer, marks his first major work in Rancho Mirage. The two-structure residence, joined by a half-Olympic-length pool, fuses modernist and Spanish colonial ideas, which is not easy to do. Here's George's conversation with Robert Stone.
Robert, you grew up in the Coachella Valley. Your dad worked in building houses, right? What kind of houses did he build?
He built houses that were for the market in the 70s and 80s, doing houses that had elements of modernism in them as much as the market could be interested in. I saw when I went to architecture school, I saw the kind of high modernism in the desert filters down into like everybody's houses in some ways, and so I would see elements that filtered into the stuff that he did from some of the bigger names and stuff. So he was kind of, he was doing like knockoff modernism, basically.
Was he working for developers primarily or for like architects like Hugh Capter?
No, he was just sitting at the kitchen table designing houses and then building them. I mean, it wasn't architecture per se. It was just, he was kind of making whatever was the current style of houses and selling them. And he did probably 20 or 30 while I was growing up. And so I'll drive around and every now and then see a house and go, oh, that's one of them, but you wouldn't know them in any way. It's a lot of Palm Springs is full of houses that are, have flat roofs and sliding glass doors and all the things that were from modernism, but nobody even called it that back then. It was just a house.
Right. It was just what you had.
It has modernism in it. It's the vernacular of Palm Springs,
And you guys moved around a lot, I understand. And when one house would finish, you would move to the next one.
Yeah. Capital gains taxes and stuff like that.
Yeah, right. Did you work with your dad in building these houses?
I did. I'm not sure I appreciated it, but it was hot.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did a fair amount of construction work. And then, and what that did for me is it meant that when I went to architecture school, there's this funny like romanticization of labor in architecture and also repulsion to it that I just didn't have. And it gave me the confidence to know what I was drawing was more than a line on a sheet of paper. It was, material and how they go together and things like that.
That sounds like a good name for your novel, Romanticism and Repulsion.
Yeah. Well, I always felt kind of comfortable with both of those worlds. And it also, it made me, I knew why I was going to architecture school. I was going to architecture school to not learn about materials so much, but pursue ideas. And so I really tended towards the theory and the kind of ideas of design when I was in architecture school, because the practical side of it, I was like pretty clear on,
And then after architecture school, you became an artist.
Yeah, I've explained that over the years. But what happened was, so I came from a small town and growing up, I was good at math and I was a reasonably smart kid. And I was interested in art, but I thought that art was kind of flaky French guys wearing berets,
Yes, smoking cigarettes.
I didn't have any exposure to that culture. And I thought, well, I want to do something where I can use my intelligence a little more than my intuition. And so I went towards architecture. And then by the time I was done with my master's degree, I had been exposed to the art world. And the art world at the time in the 90s, there were some people working in LA that were really inspiring to me in the art world. And at the time, I felt like architects were not asking very hard questions. They were doing this thing where they would kind of design a building that, would follow whatever the current styles were and then pile a bunch of words on it to try to make it interesting. But it was sort of shooting fish in a barrel in a way. And I guess I found out that the art world was much more intellectual than the architecture world at that time. And people were asking hard questions that they didn't know the answers to, and they were searching for those answers. And so the art world just seemed a lot more interesting to me at the time. And it also, there was a time in the 90s when postmodernism was kind of in the recent past enough that everybody was embarrassed, and none of the postmodernists were even admitting to being postmodernists at that point. We were kind of pivoting back towards a kind of modernist style without the modernist issues and questions. So it was kind of just a formalist modernism that a lot of architects found they could actually get paid to do. Mm-hmm. So looking at the future from the 90s, I felt like we were in for a few decades of people just cashing in on that style and not really, I didn't see it changing. I didn't see architecture really moving forward. It felt kind of stuck. There was a lot of conservative forces that were making a lot of really stylish, beautiful, elegant buildings that weren't really asking new questions. And so I gravitated towards art during that time.
Well, this is a perfect segue to your house called Dreamer with Little Dreamer.
Yeah.
A building adjacent to that. Because when I look at that project, what hits me right away is this is the evolution of modernism. You have asked some questions and you have thought about it. And this seems like a great next stage.
Well, I mean, it is for me. That's the thing is I don't relate to this idea of like movements, and architecture works in that way. It's like really glacial. And there's this whole history of like one movement kind of replacing another movement. But in the art world where I was working, everybody's job was to invent their own ideas and their own aesthetics and let the art historians figure out who's a movement. I mean, I appreciate modernism and I have some ideas about how it finds its way into my work, but I don't know if I have to have a specific relationship to it as a movement. Does that make sense?
Yes. I mean, certainly architecture is a little more contained and bigger scale than the art world. So the art world can have a lot more flexibility with wherever it goes than architects feel that they can anyway.
Yeah, I would agree with the last part of that statement mostly.
Okay.
It's kind of self-imposed. And then, you get architects over the history, they write manifestos a lot, mm-hmm. and they say everything should be this way. And I've never really understood that. I'm not saying that everybody's work should be like mine. I just think that we should all be given some space to develop our own ideas. I want to be surprised when I open architecture magazines. I want there to be as many different styles of architecture as there are architects. That's why when I answer the question, I'm kind of like, this is my interpretation of what current culture is like and what is interesting and beautiful now in the desert.
Well, let's move from 30,000 feet at the conceptual level down to ground zero. How did you get this client?
It's somebody who was interested in my past work and wanted to help me produce a project. And it was developed for sale. It wasn't a client like, that was going to be their house. It was produced, let's say, as a project.
A spec house.
Yeah, it's a spec house.
That's pretty bold to do what you have done as a spec house.
Yeah, and I mean, the people I worked with, I give them a lot of credit for being that optimistic and believing that we can do something new and that people would appreciate it. And, my past work has been pretty well appreciated, but after the fact, it's kind of easy to look back and say, well, of course, everybody loved that house, but while you're in it and you're doing it and you're introducing new ideas and new aesthetics, a lot of people aren't comfortable with that trajectory. And yet it's so life affirming. It's so amazing to put something out in the world that is challenging and that people haven't seen before and see it become kind of loved by a lot of people.
And has a house sold?
They're in really serious talk right now. That's all I can really say.
Okay. There are a couple of features of this house which are really remarkable. One is how the roof goes down to the ground. Another one is your use of breeze blocks. I think another one is the way that you have combined Spanish-style elements with modernism together. And it really does create this nice evolution of the kind of mid-century modernist style that people know and love and has been there forever, and moves it ahead. I understand that the idea of the silver glazed roof you've had for decades.
Yeah, many decades. I think the idea is I just try to look around and make something that looks like everything around us in Southern California and feels like it's an honest vernacular or like a representation of who we are that you just happen to have never seen before, you know? I'm really in love with houses as a kind of art form for architecture. And, you know, if you look at like traditional Japanese houses, they say a lot about the character of Japanese culture. And if you look at traditional Spanish hacienda, they say a lot about the people and the culture. And I'm trying to kind of do I call it like a reverse anthropology and make an architecture that expresses who we are in this time. And so it has to have some Spanish in it, and it has to have some Japanese elements to it, and it has to have some modernism in it, and it has to be kind of sexy and druggy and everything that California culture is.
If you go into Google and you type Robert Stone Dreamer, you can see what we're talking about. Robert, thank you for talking with me. I can't wait to see what you come up with next.
Yes.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by the Brent R. Harris Charitable Trust, restorer of Richard Neutra's Kaufman Desert House in Palm Springs and 6 other houses in California. By the E. Fay Jones Conservancy, preserving the legacy of modernist architecture in Northwest Arkansas. efayjonesconservancy.org. And by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 25,000 significant modernist houses, and access 5 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl, with guest research by Bobby Morris. Got a guest to suggest for the show? Write her at bobby@usmodernist.org and spell her name with an I-E at the end. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back soon with another Come Out of Your Shell edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.